He was the last of his kind. The final shadow of an age that would soon fade into legend. A king who dreamed of an empire stretching across the sea. Harald Hardrada. The name itself means hard ruler, and he earned every syllable. He was the last Viking. His life was not a quiet one. It was written in blood and fire, carved into the bones of history. From the frozen forests of Norway to the golden palaces of Constantinople, his journey was unlike any before him. He fought for princes. He served emperors. He commanded armies in lands most Vikings only dreamed of. And he loved a woman he could never forget, Elisive of Kiev, whose name he carved into his heart and into his poems. In the end, he came to England. Not as a raider seeking silver, but as a conqueror seeking a throne. 300 ships. An army of warriors who believed they were invincible. They thought destiny was on their side. But history had other plans. Destiny is not a straight line, it twists, it turns, and sometimes it breaks even the strongest men. The gods of war do not always favor the brave. They watch, they wait, and they decide when the song of a warrior must end. Harald did not know it yet, but his fate was already written. The path he walked would lead him to a distant shore, where the arrows fly and the kings fall. And on that day, even a legend can die. This is the story of Harald Hardrada, the last Viking king. A warrior, a poet, a legend. This is his saga. Harald Sigurdsson was born in 1015, into the royal family of Norway. His older brother was Olaf Haraldsson, the king who would later be known as Saint Olaf. From the moment he could hold a wooden sword, Harald dreamed of battle and glory. Olaf was more than a brother to Harald. He was a hero, a warrior king who brought Christianity to the Norse people. Harald watched him with wide eyes, learning what it meant to rule, to fight, and to inspire loyalty in men. But Olaf had made enemies. The Norwegian chieftains, led by Kaf Arneson, grew tired of his rule and his new religion. They swore to destroy him. Across the land, armies gathered for war. In the summer of 1030, the two sides met at a place called Stiklestad. Olaf's army was smaller, but his warriors were loyal. They knew they might die, but they would not run. The battle was brutal. Thousands of men clashed in the snow. Axes swung, swords bit deep, and the frozen ground drank the blood of Vikings. Brother fought brother, and friend killed friend. Olaf fought like a lion. Even wounded, he stood his ground. But the enemy was too many. He fell, pierced by a spear. His body lay in the snow, but his legend was just beginning. Harald was only 15 years old. He had fought beside his brother, swinging his sword with the fury of a grown man. But he was cut down, wounded badly, bleeding into the frozen earth. Loyal warriors found him among the dead. They carried him from the battlefield under cover of darkness, hiding him in a remote farmhouse. There, a farmer's wife nursed him back from the edge of death. When Harald finally woke, Norway was lost. The chieftains who killed Olaf now ruled the land. Harald could not stay. He had to run, to escape, to survive. He fled east, crossing mountains and forests into Sweden. A boy without a kingdom, without an army, without hope. But deep inside, a fire still burned. He would return. He would be king.
Wounded and alone, Harald fled east. He crossed mountains and forests, riding through endless winter nights. Behind him lay his brother's body. Ahead lay only darkness. He crossed frozen rivers and followed ancient paths. Vikings had traveled this way before, traders and warriors seeking fortune in the east. Harald sought only survival. Finally, he reached the great city of Novgorod, the capital of Kiev and Rus, a place where Slavs, Vikings, and Byzantines met. Here, his new life would begin. Prince Yaroslav the Wise ruled these lands. His wife Ingigerd was Swedish, a distant relative of Harald. He welcomed the young prince and gave him shelter. Harald knelt before Yaroslav and swore allegiance. He would serve the prince as a captain in his army. In return, he would earn a place in this foreign land. He trained alongside Rus warriors, learning their ways. They taught him to fight in snow, to endure cold, to lead men. Harald proved himself fearless. From the fortress walls he stared east. Rumors spoke of a great city, Constantinople, the richest city in the world, a place where a warrior could make his fortune. But Yaroslav's daughter, Elizabeth, caught his eye. She was beautiful, intelligent, and out of reach. Yet Harald could not stop looking at her. She looked back. Their eyes met across the crowded hall. No words were spoken, but something passed between them. A promise, a future. When the time came to leave, Elizabeth watched from her window. Harald mounted his horse and rode south toward Constantinople. He carried her memory with him. Finally, Harald reached Constantinople, the greatest city in the world. Miklagard, the great city. Here a warrior could find fortune, glory, and death. Emperor Michael IV welcomed the young Viking. He saw his potential and invited him to join the elite Varangian Guard, the emperor's personal bodyguard. Harald became a Varangian. These were the fiercest warriors in the empire, feared for their massive axes and their loyalty. They swore to protect the emperor with their lives. Soon he was sent to war, first against Arab pirates in the Mediterranean, then to Sicily, where the Byzantines fought to reclaim the island from Muslim rule. The Varangians were the shock troops. Wherever the fighting was hardest, they were sent. Harald proved himself fearless, leading charges and inspiring his men. City after city fell. The sagas claim he captured 80 Arab fortresses. Whether true or not, his reputation grew. He was no longer just a boy in exile. From Sicily, he was sent to Bulgaria. A rebellion threatened the empire. Harald and his Varangians crushed it. He earned a new name, Bolgara Brenner, the burners of Bulgars. According to legend, he even traveled to Jerusalem. He fought bandits, protected pilgrims, and bathed in the River Jordan, a holy journey for a man who had seen so much blood. Throughout his service, Harald collected treasure, gold, silver, gems. He sent it all back to Yaroslav in Kiev for safekeeping. He was planning something. After 10 years, he had enough. Enough gold, enough glory, enough fighting. It was time to go home. Time to claim what was his. After 10 years of service, Harald had enough. Enough gold, enough glory. He returned to Kiev, where Yaroslav had kept his treasure safe. Now he was ready to claim his future. There was another reason to return. Elizabeth, Yaroslav's daughter, the woman he had loved from across crowded halls. Finally, he could marry her. She would become his queen. They stood together on the walls and looked west. Beyond the forests, beyond the sea, lay Norway, his homeland, his destiny. He promised her he would return as king. With a fleet of ships loaded with Byzantine gold, Harald sailed for home. The wealth he carried was enough to buy armies, to build kingdoms, to change history. When he arrived, word spread fast. Harald was back, the warrior who had survived Stiklestad, who had conquered in Sicily, who had served emperors. Norway remembered him. His nephew Magnus ruled Norway, a young king who had never expected his uncle to return. They met face to face, two kings, one kingdom. Something had to give. But Magnus was wise. He knew he could not fight this legendary warrior. They made a deal. Harald would share the throne. Together, they would rule Norway. For 1 year, 2 kings ruled together. Then Magnus died. Harald was alone on the throne. Finally, after 15 years of exile, he was king of Norway. But the throne brought new challenges. Danes, Swedes, rebellious nobles. Harald ruled with an iron fist. He was no longer the young exile. He was Harald Hardrada, the hard ruler. He stood on a cliff and looked at his kingdom. The mountains, the fjords, the sea. He had come home. He was king. But he knew this was not the end. Greater battles still awaited. After becoming king, Harald looked south. Denmark lay within reach. He claimed its throne and prepared for war. For nearly 2 decades, he would fight to conquer it. Year after year, he launched raids against the Danish coast. His long ships struck without warning, burning villages and gathering tribute. But King Sweyn refused to surrender. In 1062, Harald decided on a final, decisive blow. He gathered his best ships and warriors. This time, he would force Sweyn into a battle he could not escape. The Norwegian fleet sailed south, 150 ships strong. Off the coast of Holland, near the river Nisan, they finally spotted the Danish fleet. Sweyn had brought 300 ships. The 2 fleets lined up for battle. Harald tied his ships together to form a solid line. He placed his most trusted warriors in the center, on his flagship, the Dragon. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and red, Harald raised his sword and gave the command. The silence was shattered by war cries. Rowers pulled with all their might, and the 2 fleets crashed together in a horrifying symphony of splintering wood and clashing steel. The Battle of Nisa had begun. All through the long, dark night, the slaughter continued. Ships grappled together, their crews locked in desperate hand-to-hand combat. Warriors fought with axes, swords, and spears. Arrows darkened the sky. The icy water of the Nissen ran red with blood. Neither king would yield an inch of ground. Harald himself was at the heart of the storm. Standing on the prow of the Dragon, he drove his men forward with fierce determination. His personal guard fought with legendary fury. Slowly, the weight of the Norwegian assault began to tell. The Danish lines started to crumble. By the first gray light of dawn, the scale of the victory was clear. The sea was littered with wreckage. 70 Danish ships had been completely cleared of their crews. The rest of Svein's great fleet fled in panic, pursued by the triumphant Norwegians. It was a crushing, decisive victory for Harald Hardrada. Yet the prize had escaped him. In the chaos of the night, Svein had slipped away. He was seen being rowed to shore in a small boat by one of his thralls. Harald watched him disappear into the dawn mist. The war with Denmark would drag on for 2 more bitter years before peace was finally made, with neither king able to claim total victory. While Harald battled the Danes, across the North Sea, the English throne changed hands. King Edward the Confessor died childless. The powerful Earl Harold Godwinson seized the crown. But he was not the only one with a claim. William of Normandy also coveted England, and so did Harald Hardrada. The powerful Earl Harold Godwinson seized the crown. He was the most powerful man in England, and he believed the throne was his by right. The Witan, the Council of Nobles, agreed. They crowned him king. Across the Channel, William of Normandy also coveted England. He claimed that Edward had promised him the throne years ago. He was gathering knights and building ships. And in the north, Harald Hardrada waited. The Viking king had his own claim, his own army, his own dream of conquest. Two wolves now circled England from opposite sides. Harold's claim came through a tangled web of old promises. Years ago, the English king had supposedly promised the throne to Magnus of Norway. Magnus passed that promise to Harald. It was a weak claim, built on hearsay, but for a man like Harald, it was enough. Enough to risk everything, enough to launch an invasion. Then, an unexpected ally appeared. Tostig Godwinson, brother of the new English king, had been exiled from England. Bitter and vengeful, he crossed the sea to Norway. He came with news and promises. He knew Harald's weaknesses. He knew where to strike. Tostig knelt before the Norwegian king. He placed his sword at Harald's feet and swore allegiance. "Help me take revenge on my brother," he said, "and many English nobles will join us." Harald looked at the exile, then at his warriors. He saw the opportunity. He accepted. In September 1066, Harald assembled the greatest Viking fleet since the days of Ragnar Lothbrok. More than 300 longships filled the fjords, their dragon prows gleaming in the autumn sun. This was no mere raid. This was war. This was no mere raid. This was a full-scale invasion aimed at nothing less than the conquest of England. Not for plunder, but for a crown. Harald meant to rule. The fleet crossed the North Sea, landing on the coast of Yorkshire. The first town they encountered was Scarborough, a busy port perched on the cliffs. Harold's warriors poured ashore, ready for battle. England lay before them. Its defenders refused to surrender. Harald showed them his method of persuasion. His men gathered on the cliffs above the town and rained down fire on the houses below. Scarborough burned. While Harald celebrated his victory at York, King Harald received devastating news in the south. The Norwegians had crushed his earls. York had fallen. There was no time to waste. He gathered his housecarls and marched immediately. Harald's army covered 185 miles in just 4 days, a journey that would normally take 2 weeks. Men fell from exhaustion, but the king pushed on. England depended on speed. From London to York, they marched day and night, through forests, across rivers, over hills. Local farmers watched in amazement as the king's army rushed past. Harald would not stop until he reached the enemy. When they finally reached York, the city was quiet. Harald learned that the Norwegians had moved east to Stamford Bridge, expecting hostages. The king smiled. They didn't know he was coming. At Stamford Bridge, the Vikings relaxed in the warm September sun. It was unseasonably hot. Many had left their heavy armor on the ships at Rickall. They expected nothing but peace. Miles away at Rickall, thousands of chain-mail hauberks lay stacked on the longships. Without them, the Vikings would be vulnerable. But no one thought to fetch them. Why would they? The English were supposed to be in the south. Suddenly, a glint of sunlight reflected off metal shields on the western ridge. Thousands of English soldiers appeared, marching in perfect formation. King Harald Godwinson had arrived, and he brought his entire army. A Viking sentry stared in disbelief. It couldn't be. The English king was supposed to be 300 miles away. But there he was, with thousands of men, ready for battle. He shouted a warning that came too late. The camp erupted into chaos. Warriors scrambled for weapons, but their armor was miles away. Men shouted, horses panicked, and commanders screamed orders. They had minutes to prepare for a battle they never expected. The river Derwent lay between them. A narrow wooden bridge was the only crossing. If the Vikings could hold it, they might survive long enough for reinforcements, but time was running out. The English were coming. With the giant warrior finally dead, the English army poured across the bridge. Thousands of soldiers flooded onto the eastern bank, forming a battle line just yards from the Vikings. The two shield walls crashed together with a deafening roar. Swords bit into shields, axes split helmets, and men screamed and died in the bloody chaos. The Vikings fought with desperate courage, but they were outnumbered, and many lacked armor. Harald Hardrada fought in the front line, as a Viking king should. His great axe swept through the English ranks. He was a towering figure, inspiring his men even as the battle turned against them. Then an arrow found its mark. It struck Harald in the throat. The last great Viking king stumbled and fell, blood pouring from his wound. Around him, his warriors cried out in horror. Their king was dead. Tostig took command, rallying the remaining warriors for a desperate last stand. He fought bravely, but the numbers were too great. He was cut down, dying on the same field as the king he had convinced to invade. Reinforcements arrived from the ships at Rickel. They charged into the fray, fully armed and fresh, briefly checking the English advance. But it was too little, too late. The Viking shield wall shattered. Warriors fled toward the river, pursued by vengeful English soldiers. Many drowned trying to cross, weighed down by their heavy armor. When the slaughter finally ended, thousands of bodies covered the field. Of the 300 ships that had carried Harold's army to England, only 24 were needed to carry the survivors home. The greatest Viking fleet since the days of Ragnar Lothbrok had been utterly destroyed. Harold Godwinson had won a stunning victory, but he had no time to rest. Even as he celebrated, a messenger arrived with urgent news. William of Normandy had landed at Pevensey. The Norman invasion had begun. Harold marched his exhausted army south with impossible speed, 240 miles in just 2 weeks. His men were weary, wounded, and grieving, but they had no choice. They had to fight again. On October 14, 1066, they met William at Hastings. The battle lasted all day. The English shield wall held for hours, repelling wave after wave of Norman cavalry. But as dusk fell, Harold was struck in the eye by an arrow and killed. The English line finally broke. On Christmas Day, William the Conqueror was crowned King of England in Westminster Abbey. A new era had begun. The old Anglo-Saxon world was gone forever. But Harold's story did not end at Stamford Bridge. His sons returned to Norway and ruled as kings. His daughter Maria continued his line. His blood flowed through Scandinavian royalty for generations. Harald Hardrada was the last Viking, a warrior who had served emperors and fought for thrones, a poet who composed verses even in battle, a king who had almost conquered England, a man whose echoes still reach us across 1,000 years. This was his saga. This was the end of an age.